I don't think there'll be another animated Disney movie quite like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Sure, its scope may not be the largest in any film of the Walt Disney Animation Studios canon, with it mostly being set in one small location, and the original source being quite literally a crude interpretation of Victor Hugo's original novel. But everything around the film just makes it feel more grand than it really is. From the towering vistas of the Notre Dame Cathedral, all the way down to how its bells reverberate throughout the soundtrack. The movie just soars in all directions, even when it's being the polar opposite. And that's just another factor as to why I find this the most audacious film Disney has ever created. It tackled themes that have never been touched on again in the same light as this movie. There's always been morbid elements from the studio before, and even after this film released in 1996. But Hunchback is that very rare exception where the villain sniffs somebody's hair, proclaims that he wants a rope around her neck, and then proceeds to sing about using her for sexual pleasure. Oh Disney, your family-friendly image these days. This is in one of your movies now, you can't erase this! Or at least, that's what they tried to do for the most part. So without further ado, let's discuss a few different areas that this film, or most apparently its songs, were censored or changed in order to appease the lowest ratings possible. Firstly, we'll turn our attention towards the Disney Sing-Along Song series, which were primarily released during the late 1980s to the following decade. As the name implies, it's a series of video cassettes that describes itself so, being a collection of songs from various Disney films with burnt-in lyrics so that viewers can sing along. A practice that would essentially be copied over with other unrelated films like The Swan Princess and even Don Bluth productions like Anastasia. There were some odd choices made with the series though, like with the first volume released in the series being titled around Song of the South, a movie that, controversies aside, didn't release on home video in North America and to this day, has yet to do so. Or how in the Peter Pan volume during I Got No Strings, the lyrics sung by the stereotype Russian puppets have this faux Cyrillic way of text in the lyrics. A lot of the songs as well got really random by the early 2000s, such as the ones that treated minorities with the utmost respect, and the entirety of the Home on the Range release, which just has random kids dancing around. It even just resorts to just a random song from some Playhouse Disney series. The final release of the series uses a song from the movie Ella Enchanted for some reason. Okay. The Nightmare Before Christmas being used on a few volumes as well, despite its origins tying itself to the now-defunct Touchstone Pictures, and even the inclusion of Mine, Mine, Mine from Pocahontas. Hey kids, who wants to sing along to the invasion of English settlers on Native American land? That then brings us to the 15th volume of the series, titled Topsy Turvy, which was just renamed to The Hunchback of Notre Dame in other regions, and The Bells of Notre Dame in Japan. Unlike previous volumes of the series, this has absolutely no framing device whatsoever stitching the songs all together. Older releases in the series were primarily hosted by Professor Owl, a character who appeared in a few CinemaScope shorts from the 1950s. They even resort to recycling old animation directly from those shorts, mainly in the intro sequence. A few other volumes or segments were also hosted by Ludwig von Drake or Jiminy Cricket. But by the late 1990s, I would assume the budget for these releases became incredibly low, as on volumes that prominently feature songs from Hercules and Hunchback, they don't have any framing device whatsoever, aside from the intro that is present on majority of the releases. In regards to how many songs the headlining film features on this cassette, however, there are only 2 songs, Topsy Turvy and Out There. Kind of weird to see that a guy like you didn't appear a part of this song selection, as despite the tonal whiplash it presents to the film itself, it's largely the tamest song in the entire film. But this later appeared in the European exclusive volume featuring songs from Hercules, as well as the US exclusive Mulan volume. The first song is Topsy Turvy, as the name of the volume implies, which was mostly changed a little to cut down on the risque imagery. As such, Esmeralda's entire dance sequence has been removed entirely and presumably for good reason. The scene where Quasimodo meets Esmeralda has also been cut, leading to a really odd edit where the chorus essentially plays twice in a row with no breaks, and then immediately jumps into the last quarter of the song with yet another really jarring edit. But that's not the only edit to the song in this cassette, as there is a single notable change to the lyrics itself. In the original film, Clopin states this: "It's the day that Devilinos gets released. It's the day we mock the pig and shock the priest." Which is actually a pretty ingenious lyric and falls in line with a lot of the other creative liberties seen in the film itself. It's essentially just about forgetting your woes and becoming as subversive as you can be, but mostly just making fun of those who think of themselves as a higher power. The prig in question being Frollo. I mean, just look at him, he's anything but thrilled to be here. But because this one part specifically mentions the devil, Disney thought that would be too mature for their film that was already rated G in many countries, so in this cassette, it was changed so that Clopin now states, "Good is bad
and best is worst and west is east. On the day we think the most of those with least. Everything.
Which I suppose gets the same message across of the Feast of Fools being not what anyone should expect without being sacrilegious. But it's just so much lamer from a lyrical standpoint, knowing how much artistry went to the rest of the songs themselves. Plus, I don't think it just sounds great either, seeing as the word "and" is used twice within the span of one lyric. You could put anything in place of the original line. Yeah, it'll sound different, but it would be so much better than the choices that this billion-dollar conglomerate can still make on a daily basis. I also noticed another change to the lyrics, though very minute, is one that I personally don't mind at all since it goes by very fast. Take a listen.
Once a year we love to dropping, where the beer is never stopping, for a chance to popping and once a year we love to dropping, where the cheer is never stopping, for the chance to popping jail.
Anyways, the next Notre Dame song after the relationship of a boy and his toy, a humorous cover of a 1960s song, and the predecessor to the cinematic opus that is Another Day of Sun, is Out There, which, like the Feast of Fools before it, is also cut down from its original version, but less egregious than before, as the only scene that is cut in this cassette is the opening with Frollo, stating to Quasimodo how the people below the bell towers will revile him by essentially pointing out how fucking ugly he looks. And so, naturally, because of the opening being the most maturely thematic part of the song, this was the only scene to be cut out of the cassette. And it just starts with Quasimodo looking morbidly sad about something, who knows by who. You know what's a little funny though? Even though they removed the scene of Frollo degrading Quasi, the scene of the townspeople reacting to his proportions, as well as Frollo's growing temper, is still intact at the tail end of the Topsy-Turvy segment. The program also ends with the same final quarter of the song, just without any of the on-screen lyrics. So that's a little interesting. Let's just not wonder what happens to Quasi behind those curtains. Similar to the sing-along video cassettes we just mentioned, the lowly audio cassettes were a way of life for many years. It seemed like every single kind of media that was released, no matter how shitty, had their own storybook or sing-along cassette to accompany the theatrical release, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame is no exception. I found this used at a thrift store for just $2, and it's pretty interesting. This was released around the same time as the movie's theatrical release in 1996, and there are two different packaging variants. One which came packaged with a cheap cassette player and headphones themed to the movie, and one that didn't. My copy didn't come with the player, just the cassette and book in this raggedy plastic bag. New unopened copies also advertised the June 26 release date of the Sing-Along Songs video cassette we just mentioned, but unlike the aforementioned cassette, there are some changes to this tape that are just as, if not more different than the one before. 5 songs are included, that being Out There, Topsy-Turvy, A Guy Like You, Heaven's Light, and The Bells of Notre Dame, completely excluding Hellfire and The Court of Miracles, which is pretty understandable. But the absence of God Help the Outcasts, I suppose, makes sense as well. Something that doesn't make sense is instead packaging the song in the second volume of a series titled Disney Rascals, fully uncut too, as well as being pressed on the same discs with songs sung by the villains? Weird. McDonald's celebrates Disney music. Anyways, the first song has one change that is quite weird, as it keeps the entire first sequence with Frollo, minus the opening instrumentals. Unlike the next title coming up, where I can actually understand the changes and additions made to the song itself, this cassette keeps every single original lyric from the opening intact. It's even in the included songbook, so now you can sing a lovely duet to your friend about how deformed they are and how the outside world will never accept a being like them without revolting back. How beautiful. I mean, the rest of the song is fine and all complete, it just sounds really blown out and even features some lovely damage done by the previous owner.
I am your only friend.
Topsy-Turvy is interesting too, although with a few discrepancies. The good is bad line is kept in, as well as the removal of beer, but it adds in both of the instrumental sections that were cut from the VHS release. It even keeps Clopen's dialogue of Esmeralda entering the stage. One could only imagine that these parts were only added in for the audio cassette release because of the lack of visual material to work off, as they were cut on the VHS for the risque sequences that were prominently featured here. But it's still a little awkward when it comes to the actual sing-along portion itself, as about 90 seconds of the actual song are just filled with this quiet, muffled, warped instrumental track, complete with analog hiss. A Guy Like You is unsurprisingly and unfortunately played complete without cuts. I legitimately don't have any other words to say on how to describe this song. It's just one of the worst songs in filmmaking history, and it's just so tonally inappropriate given the context of the story up to that point. From the voice crack to the statues clicking their fingers, and even the lyrics themselves. Why would Quasimodo's proportions be based on the shape of a croissant? Other than the film being set entirely in France, I sure wouldn't know. Speak to me, Stephen Schwartz, lyricist of this movie. It's weird to think that God Help the Outcast was also exempt from this cassette, yet it appeared completely unchanged on a promotional CD for McDonald's with other villain songs. At least Stephen got to write songs for the Prince of Egypt 2 years later. And one pretty bad song over one incredible soundtrack? I'd say that's a trade-off that I'll openly accept. Now, this is where the cassette starts to get a little interesting, as although Hellfire wasn't included on the tape, it was originally paired together with Quasimodo's lighter side of the story, that being In Heaven's Light. The first part of the song is presented here in its entirety, but once the bells start ringing, that's it! It just fades out. What else can I say? They turned the first part of a 5-minute song into its own separate track. The only difference is a bit of reverb during the fade out, which already was pretty seamless to cut out as is, but I digress. The final song, also being the longest one, is of course the opening to the film, The Bells of Notre Dame. The changes that were made to the originally 6.5-minute song are something to say the least. Firstly, while it retains the opening dialogue of Clopin interacting with the locals, the bells that are heard before the first shot of the cathedral are completely cut out. Alright, understandable. Though another change that's weird is how they remove the dialogue of the Romani immigrants moving the prologue along. So up until he utters Frollo's name, both of their dialogue is completely cut out. They also remove Frollo's dialogue of, "This is an unholy demon, I'm sending it back to hell where it belongs," falling in line with all of the other changes to remove religious allegories. All of these changes, I'm good with them all. I mean, it doesn't really affect the song in any way. Until about halfway through when an obnoxious edit is made. You would think with all of the edits made to this song already, it would be easier to just remove the mother's dialogue entirely, but nah. They have to go ahead and make this extremely jarring edit instead. Nope, that's it. Back in storage you go. I've had enough of this. Which brings us to the whole reason I wanted to make this video, the original Australian VHS release. Well, the sing-along cassette had to be released in my home country, marking the 13th and final title in the series that was released here, but they also had to release the original film itself on VHS. I mean, why wouldn't they? Well, the film had a few concerning scenes that were questioned by the then-named Office of Film and Literature Classification, or OFLC for short, but we'll get back to that in a bit. The film was eventually released on home video with a G rating and a notice stating that some scenes may not be suitable for younger viewers. This is also, as far as I'm aware, the only Australian Disney VHS with a special notice during the rating screen. For pretty much all of the changes seen in both the sing-along VHS and the audio cassette, they're completely intact in this version of the film. The opening song is uncut, Topsy Turvy retains the original lines, A Guy Like You is still the same horrible song as before, but this cassette does have two significant changes that were pushing the PG limit. The first is in that one scene where Frollo confronts Esmeralda. You know the one, hair sniffing? Well, in the Australian VHS, quite a large chunk of the scene was cut out. The scene pretty much writes itself and why it was cut, while Frollo compares Esmeralda's people to the disillusionment of religion. But apart from that one scene, it's quite unsubstantial to the core story. It's even a little jarring with the edit as well. In one scene, Frollo is right in front of Esmeralda, but then the next, he's walking away from her. They only cut this scene out because of the line about the hanging. They could have left the other line said by Frollo, but instead they cut both out, leaving this continuity error. But the second and far more egregious censor happens in the scene where Quasimodo sings Heaven's Light. I mean, they're obviously going to cut the entirety of Hellfire out. I mean, they already did that with the sing-along cassette, so if my assumptions are correct... Oh, no way? We're actually doing this? This isn't a joke, right? Alright, so it seems like despite everything, the OFLC were completely fine putting the super thematic religious sexual allegory song Hellfire in a G-rated kids movie. This is awesome.
He made the devil so much stronger than a man.
Minister Frollo, the gypsy has escaped. But how? Never mind. I'll find her. I'll find her if I have to burn down all of Paris.
So yeah, as entirely played out, this is the defining reason as I wanted to make this video in the first place. Hellfire is there, but only for a little bit. It only features the first verse and chorus, and only a fraction of the second verse before just stopping entirely. I mean, come on, that's like if during the Circle of Life, the song just ends before Simba is held up. And what's even worse than a quarter of the song being cut out? They still leave the one remark of Frollo's quote-unquote fireplace troubles. Sure, I guess it still has some relevance to the scene before it, but it doesn't have the same amount of impact, you know?
Morning, sir. Are you feeling all right?
I had a little trouble with the fireplace.
While researching for this video, I came across a website called Refuse Classification, which details many instances of censored media in Australia, with Notre being one of them. The film was viewed for review purposes on the 12th of July 1996, and the many scenes picked out by the review board that didn't abide by the restrictions of the G rating are as follows. At 3 minutes, a gypsy mother is pursued by Frollo. She is thrown onto the cathedral steps by him, hits her head, and dies. At 30 minutes, Quasimodo gets tied to the village square, is pelted with trash, and whipped. At 35 minutes, Frollo sniffs Esmeralda's hair and remarks about having a rope around her neck. At 50 minutes, Frollo sings about his feelings for Esmeralda by a fireplace, all while menacing figures in red robes and black shadows appear. At 53 minutes, families are thrown in the river or locked in their burning homes. At 75 minutes, the battle for the cathedral emerges. Okay. And at 78 minutes, Frollo chases Quasimodo and Esmeralda with a sword and with much menace. It was also noted that parts of the movie that use song to tell the story would be too complex for children's perceptions on the plot, something that Disney had already been doing for years before this film came out, but I digress. The film was rated PG for low-level violence by the review board, but in the end, it was released in theaters with the same G rating as the VHS release. The website doesn't reveal much as to why the film ended up releasing this way, aside from an unknown re-rating of sorts in 1999 with the original low-level PG rating. It's not like this is for a theatrical re-release or anything, as it was only made for review purposes. Both the theatrical release and VHS received the G rating, and the uncut DVD didn't release here until October of 2001. Australian censorship is crazy, man. Just a few years later, Anastasia faced the same cuts as well on the theatrical release and VHS release, where frightening demonic visuals were too much for a G rating, yet seeing the villain's crumbling corpse turn into dust, on screen mind you, was perfectly fine. But maybe someday, a censored film print will find itself in the hands of lucky projectionists and I'll be able to see it. I saw a lot of material in 35mm last year. Movies, trailers, advertisements, you name it. And it's certainly not going to stop this year. That's all I really wanted to talk about, but there are a few other things that I should at least mention. The film was released in every country of the Gulf Cooperation Council except for Saudi Arabia. This actually came to me as a surprise thanks to my friend Mesh VHS Mesh, who owns a few Arabic tapes featuring trailers for this film. And you gotta love the broken English and proud tune that plays during the message. The reason as to why it was never released in Saudi Arabia? Honestly, I couldn't really find much information. Maybe it had to do with the ongoing ban of movie theaters in the kingdom, a ban that would not be lifted until 2017 with the theatrical release of the Emoji Movie. You know, knowing that, they probably should have just kept the ban in place. The only other information I could find is a CBC article stating that the screening of movies was banned in the 1980s because the conservative clergy at the time viewed films as a waste of time, and that it corrupted the country's morals. But the message only applies to the Hunchback trailer and none of the others. So my only other guess is the heavy usage of religious imagery and allegories, in the same way the Prince of Egypt was banned for portraying and visually depicting Islamic prophets like Moses. That being said, the Arabic dub that did see a release outside of Saudi Arabia has a few notable changes of their own. The archdeacon is referred to as a bishop in this version, and a Latin phrase that translates to Blessed Mary in English became something along the lines of, "Your forgiveness, my lord." Although Phoebus's one line stating that his name stands for sun god wasn't altered. It's almost like they were going knee-deep to alter certain things to avoid any religious allegories and whatnot, as if the movie taking place in a cathedral wasn't enough. The film also miraculously saw a quite possibly unofficial release in North Korea, with one of the only notable changes being that all of the Latin chants that were prominently heard in the songs were censored. The title of the film was also altered to add the subtitle of Foreign Animated Films, probably to cover up the fact that a completely American studio was behind the film. The changes seen on the Australian VHS did not apply to TV airings of the film, so despite still being rated G by networks like Channel 7, the film is aired completely uncut. Mesh also stated that the film received edits in the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Scandinavia, Japan, and Greece. Information on some of these countries' releases are quite sparse, but from what I'm aware of, the UK and Germany, as well as the French, Canadian, and European Spanish versions of the film only received changes to their end credits song, most likely for a more wide appeal to those specific countries. Even the UK version, despite being rated universal for all ages, doesn't carry any changes whatsoever, both theatrically or physically. No material likely to offend or harm. Well, aside from this guy. I don't know how to close this video, so let's finish off today by discussing the read-along storybook, which I thought was at least interesting enough to give a mention. It's narrated by and read through the perspective of the Archdeacon, whose calming demeanor brings so much weight to such a dark yet powerful storyline. I think what makes this even more special is that, rather being voiced by some random guy like the majority of the other storybook cassettes released by Disney, it's actually narrated by David Ogden Stiers, the voice of the Archdeacon in the film. He even narrates the extended 60-minute version. Pretty cool. It hits every significant plot beat of the movie, as well as using voice clips from the actual film, and even that plays after every page. Although much more sanitized and condensed, like the Feast of Falls is only referred to as a celebration in which men wore masks. Quasimodo immediately meets Esmeralda after dropping down to the aforementioned festival. The entire Hellfire scene is completely glossed over, and some of the illustrations are pretty hilarious as well, like why is Phoebus just chilling under this table? In fact, every page featuring him looks really goofy. But it's impressive that a film like this managed to get away with so much and yet still was released at the lowest possible rating in many countries. Nowadays, most mainstream animated films are created with so much more care and attention towards the final product, and possibly for the worse, are made so safe that they're hardly considered films for the entire family anymore. I mean, when you're a child, all you want to do is eat Play-Doh and watch Erky Perky, so why even bother with such thought-provoking and transcending material that your target audience is most likely not going to understand half the time? I once saw a comment on Twitter on the Feast of Fools scene in particular, stating that the reason a film like Hunchback is so loved is because it felt so real. You want to root for Quasimodo in spite of all of the townspeople revolting against him, and I wholeheartedly agree. It's okay to feel challenged, to be afraid and sad at such a young age, to see how one person or a group of people can come together and improve themselves. It's why we still resonate with characters like Simba, Ariel, Belle, Jim Hawkins, and even Quasimodo today because of how real their hardships felt. But I suppose the big head conglomerates don't see it as much anymore. Like, what is there to feel connected with Searcher Clade or Asha? The Hunchback of Notre Dame is just one of, if not the best animated movies ever created. Even in spite of all of the tonally incongruent bullshit you have to sit through. It still wouldn't be able to tramp the sheer amount of audacious material in just a single movie, or any movie in general marketed towards kids. There is one thing that has never changed ever since Hunchback released in 1996, however, and it's the amount of unnecessary merchandise it had. Of course, you had figurines and dolls, soundtrack CDs, coloring books, playsets, the usual ground to cover, but this is Disney, so we gotta merchandise this franchise to hell. Literally. You had stuff like pin sets, magic trick sets, binders, diaries, lunchboxes, board games, coin holders, beach towels, wallets, suitcases, a Tiger Electronics handheld, Christmas tree ornaments, snow globes, and even jackets! Look at this! This looks so ugly! Like, I know it's supposed to fit the theme of the movie art and style guides, but it seriously looks like something you would wear at the football game during a rainy day! And last but not least, not to mention, funny t-shirts! Does the name Quasimodo ring a bell? No.